Okay, welcome back. Again, I'm Melody Lauer from Citizens Defense Research and joined with Ross. We were talking our last episodes about consent, and now we are going to be talking about boundaries, which hopefully, when we're talking about boundaries, we're talking about how to protect ourselves from the people who are potentially going to attempt to violate our consent and predate on us. So that being said, Ross, you kind of already gave your intro before, but really briefly for those who might be just tuning into this one, real quick, give us a refresh on your expertise in this area.
So I've spent the last couple decades working for the government, trying to basically predict behavior for convicted violent criminals, and in particular, the last 5-6 years, sex offenders. And basically, my job is to arrest them if stuff starts to go a certain way. Behavioral analyst would be like the closest thing I could come up with for that. Yeah.
Okay. So the last couple of things that we talked about were all around consent, and it's a messy, messy topic. And now we're getting into, all right, how do we protect ourselves? And boundaries is a term that has only been around for what, the last 15, 20 years? It might have been used before that, but really in kind of like colloquial terms and real common uses. It's relatively new. What are your understandings of the term boundaries, and what does that mean?
So boundaries are first off, they shouldn't be negotiable with other people. However, they're going to change. They aren't static. And so as we develop as humans, our boundaries do change, right? What we are comfortable with versus not. Look back to what you're comfortable with as a kid in general, right? With social interaction, things like that versus today. And whether we like to imagine it or not, a lot of times, we get ourselves into trouble, I think, because we like to imagine that our sexual boundaries are static, right? I like this, I don't like this, done. And that has not been my experience, and that has not been the experience of talking to a lot of people about it, where again, like all the other boundaries, they change over time. And so it becomes tough because sex offenders are absolutely great at pushing boundaries and getting you to nudge your boundaries just a little further, just a little further, just a little further. They are the used car salesman of the sexual world. And I use that term all the time, right? He was doing the used car salesman thing, because they will do it with everything because they're really good at it. So as an example, I put people on a schedule that accounts for every minute of every day for the next 7 days. And I then track them to make sure they're actually doing that and stuff. But what they will inevitably do, especially sex offenders, is start to ask for a favor. Hey, man, and they'll just push that just a little further. And so a great example of this is if you've ever read the news report about the corrections officer falling in love with the inmate and getting fired for it, or slipping them a phone, or doing something to get themselves, and everybody's it happens every few years, and everybody's reaction is always like, how could that person be so stupid? Well, the number one way that happens is an inmate, picks a person who they think is going to be approachable, right? And what they're looking to do is weaponize the best parts of you. So your kindness, your forgiveness, your ability to try to see the good in other people, they're going to find that person and they're going to come up and say something like, hey, CO, I know I screwed up, and I'm telling you because you're a good person and I know you're going to tell me what to do, and I trust you, but I screwed up. And they'll pick something that doesn't really matter, right? It's not going to be, I murdered a guy. It's going to be, I got a bunch of stuff hidden under my bed, and I'm not supposed to have it, and whatever is contraband, and whatever it is. And the whole point of them asking is that, what did I just subtly do? I said, you're a good person. And
Mhm.
if you then turn around and say, well, into the hole with you, or whatever, right? Here's your punishment. That is subtly saying you're not a good person anymore if you do that, if you enforce that boundary that you're supposed to have professionally. And so there's social pressure to say, okay, you screwed up, I'm going to give you this time. Next time, it's going to be a different conversation, but I'm glad you told me. And that might feel like a social win for that person. In fact, it's the easiest out, right? It lets them win
Mhm.
with their employer because they don't have to say it with the person. But what they've done is just driven a wedge to where not only do I now have this thing I can hold over your head as an inmate, but also now I've gotten you to compromise your values for me, whether you know it or not, just a tiny little bit. And I can build on that because next time, now I can say, oh, hey, I'm having trouble with this guy. I don't know what to do. Can you help me? And it'll be a give and take. It's not always going to be them on the back foot, but they will almost always start that way if they're good. And so, long story short, boundaries get really, really tough because, again, sex offenders are absolutely professional at pushing them, but they do also naturally change as you get more experienced. And so it is very hard sometimes to tell which is which.
The best the best example I ever heard about boundaries was, think of your house, right? You have your house or your apartment or whatever, but imagine it's a house. You have your house, you have your yard. The boundaries are the fence that goes around your property. You are responsible for everything on your property and your house. You are not responsible for anything going on in anybody else's property. And that really helped me more clearly understand both what boundaries were and how how they get violated, right? And so, the categories of boundaries, your time, you have boundaries around your time, who you're going to give your time to, who you're not. Money, your money is your own. You get to decide who you're going to give it to and who you're not. Your body, you get to decide what you're going to do with your body and what you're not. And there are others, but those are kind of like the big ones, right? Those are the big, and your ideas, your thoughts, like those are your own. And nobody can come into your house in your yard and tell you how to think or how to feel. Nobody can come into your house and your yard and tell you what to do with your money or tell you what to do with your body. And when even if it is to try to do something good. And I think this is where most of your predators start. Because, like you said, they don't just come in. Well, some do, sure. Like some do come
Some
in
do.
and just like, yeah, no, and it
But
is
you
an
won the lottery,
overt.
frankly, if that's your offender. That's a
Yeah,
very
because most of
non-sophisticated
them
predator.
are gonna come in and maybe help you with something. Maybe they're
Hmm.
going to come in and try to, give you money for something. Oh, I saw, or give you a gift
Yep.
and say, and now does that mean
Or
that we should
ask for
never,
help.
yeah, should we never accept gifts? No, I'm not saying that at all. But, and this is a conversation I was just having with my kids the other day. You need to be very, very careful about who you accept gifts and favors from. Because as we were talking
Mm.
in our last episode, that transactional in nature. I did this nice thing for you. Now you owe me. And they're patient, right? It could be 6 months
Oh
down the
man, are
line.
they
They
patient?
give you something, and then all of a sudden it's
Years.
like, remember that time I gave you that $100? Now you can't
I
tell me
I
no on
cannot
this.
tell you how many times that has happened.
Yes. So, when I think of that house analogy, right? If someone comes into your house to, like, I gave this analogy to a friend of mine once because he was struggling with understanding boundaries. And I said, imagine there was a storm and a window got broken. Would you go over to your neighbor's house and your neighbor wasn't home? Would you go over to your neighbor's house and fix the window? Well, no. Well, why not? Because it's not my house. Exactly. So if somebody is trying to come and fix something of yours that you did not ask them to. Now, if you came home and saw that your window was broken and your neighbor is a carpenter and you're like, hey, could you come over here and fix my window? I'll pay you for it. That might be okay, right? But if I came home and suddenly someone I didn't know was working on my house, would you feel weird about that? Yeah, you'd feel weird about that. And you should, right? Or if you came home and there's $100 sitting on your kitchen table, yeah, it's $100, but would you feel weird about it? You probably would, and you should, because that's your house. That's not their house. They shouldn't have been in there. And I think that a lot of times our predators do that. They force help or gifts
Oh,
on to
absolutely.
people. And then later on, it's like, but I didn't ask you to do this. I didn't give my consent for you to come and do this for me. But they still try to use it as like a, but you took it because you insisted. So
Mhm.
talk about that a little bit.
Yep. Yeah, it is incredibly common, even in small conversations with sex offenders. So again, like you said, pushing boundaries of like, hey, I did this thing. The number of coffees I've been offered or whatever it
Oh
is,
yeah.
right? That I've had to be like, dude works in a coffee shop and I walk in and he just starts making a coffee. And I'm like, who's that for? And he's like, oh, it's for you. Wasn't even going to ask, right? He's just going to put it on the counter. And I'm like, nope. And he's, he looks all offended, and I know he's not, but knows how to play the game. And he's like, oh, I was just going to make it for you, man. I'm going to make it anyways. I'm going to make it anyways. And I'm like,
Mm.
no, do not make me that coffee because I am not going to take it. It's going to sit on the counter until you throw it out because I know how this game works. And also, there's policy that I can't accept gifts, especially not from you. But I also, beyond that, know that this is going to come and bite me in the butt if I do. And so, but dude still made the coffee. It just literally ignored me, set it on the counter like I was going to take it. And that was so sex offender. I can't even, I mean, it described, I was just like, of course you're not going to listen to my boundaries. Of course you're not going to listen, listen to me saying no. You're just going to do it. Yep.
Well, and the
And then
way that
because
you
it's a nice
described,
thing.
yeah, and the way you described the offense, like that, what do you mean? Like that offense being taken
Yeah.
at rejection. And I think that because like you said, we're so programmed in many ways to be nice and to not want social awkwardness that if someone offers us a gift and we don't want it, one, we might take it just because we don't want the awkwardness of saying no. But
Hmm?
then if we do say no and they're like, what, you won't even let me do something nice for you? Oh,
Yeah.
that should be like Red Bull waving
Yep.
flag because
But that's leveraging
yeah, it's
that
that
put good part of you,
control,
right?
trying to take
Yep.
back that control, trying to put you on your heels, trying to make you feel guilty for having boundaries.
For having
And
boundaries. Mhm.
yep, and for the moment that someone can accomplish making you feel guilty for having boundaries, they've put a chip in your fence and they know exactly where to start hammering. And I think that everybody, and I hate to say this, but I think everybody should deny someone at least once in their relationship, right? Like if you're in a relation if you're like going out to coffee with someone, right? And the guy says, "Don't worry, I got it." Go, "No, this is our first date. I really would prefer to pay for my own way." If he gets angry at that or if he gets defensive at that, save yourself from having a second, because even if he's a good
Yeah.
guy, even if he's like, or she, this could be a she too, they're going to respect your decision. Even if they're like, well, I was raised that a man always pays. I understand that. I was not raised that way. I would just really feel comfortable. I'll tell you what, if we do another date, I'll let you pay for the next one. And if he goes, okay, that sounds reasonable. Okay. But if he's like, I can't believe you. You're disrespecting me by not allowing me to do my chivalrous thing. Ooh, you know. So I really do believe that early in a relationship, you should practice rejecting someone's minimal nices and find a way to do that because their reaction is going to tell you a lot about them and how your relationship is going to be moving forward.
100%. The other side of that is the asking for help kind of thing. And I think it's important to, just like you said, be able to deny that at least once because um some people's problems are not yours, right? Your neighbor, like you said, your
Yeah.
neighbor's problems, it's nice to be a nice neighbor, but they're adults, right? And this is where I mentioned earlier when they start to leverage the best parts of you and they're experts at that, that's what I'm talking about. They will make you feel horribly guilty for not helping or for denying when they ask for help or for refusing an offer of help from them. And what a lot of victims come out of that with, because I unfortunately have to hear or talk to a lot of them after the fact, is they always doubt that. They always doubt their own, they always doubt themselves, right? initially. How was I so stupid? How did I not see these signs? How did
Yeah.
I not do this thing? And that's almost universal. And to the point that you have to stop and say, you this happened to you. Like this, you are not alone. Chances are with sex offenders, there are dozens of victims by the time they get caught, most of them statistically. And so, like, it this person did this to you and they're very good at it. And unfortunately, they're very good at convincing you that it's all your fault or that you should have seen these things. And on the backside of that, what a lot of people do is then put up these big boundaries where they're just like, okay, I'm never going to trust another person again.
Mhm.
I'm never going to do this thing again. I'm going to withdraw and be avoidant and do all this stuff. And that's even worse. There's research out there that shows that actually highlights you to future sex offenders as a victim that has been victimized before. And there's a slightly different skill set to get to that person, but the playbook for that person is almost easier than the other person, right? Because they know what their roadblocks are going to be, having been victimized. And what people like to believe is that they are smart and they're never going to let it happen again because it can't happen again, right? That would be devastating. And that creates in a lot of people this, I don't want to say false sense of security, but hey, if I don't ever trust anyone again, it can't happen to me again. And that's an in, right? Because if a person believes they can't be fooled or can't be tricked or can't be manipulated, that is the most manipulable, I don't know if that's a word, person that
Vulnerable,
exists, right?
yeah.
Vulnerable. There you go. Vulnerable is the word I was looking for. And so that's not an answer either, right?
Mhm.
The real answer is, like you were saying, is to figure out your boundaries, to experiment, to put them out there and see what the other person's reaction is. But if you're just like, nope, never going to trust people again, that's impossible. You will not be able to
Mhm.
get through the rest of your life as a human not trusting other people,
Well,
in some
I like
capacity, right? And you're
what
going to
you
be
said.
miserable if you do.
Yeah, for sure. And I like what you said before when we were talking about consent. Finding one person that you can trust and just bouncing things off of them, right? So if you're in this place where you're just like, no, I'm not going to trust anyone ever again, then you don't have that person. And maybe it's just a therapist. Like maybe that's what you get a therapist for, where you can be
Mhm.
like, hey, I went on a date and or I'm thinking about going on a date and I need to have a conversation about boundaries because I'm really afraid. I'm really afraid. I've been hurt in the past. I've been victimized in the past. I need to figure out what it is that I want, what it is that I need, and how to communicate that. And that's literally what their job is, like to help
Mhm.
you figure out your limits, what you like, what you don't like, and how to communicate those in a way that's very clear, but also in a way that protects you from those people who are going to just try to trample all over them. Um, and so along that line, when I think about like what do you think are some, I guess, good baseline boundaries? I mean, like you said, no one's going to have the same boundaries. But what do you think are some baseline boundaries that people can have when they're starting to meet people and socialize with them?
I think figuring out what you want out of, I hate to say as cliche as it is, life and relationships and all of that is a really good start. Even if you think you're just having a casual date with somebody, I think that not having any idea what it is you want this thing to end in is dangerous territory for a lot of people because it's going to end up, if you don't know what you want, right, that makes it
Mhm.
all the easier for the other person to decide what you want and start to push it and nudge it towards what they want. And so figuring that out is super powerful. That takes time and that's not going to be a static thing for each person, right? But figure that out now. Um, if you notice the other person, like you said, ignoring your boundaries, right? Trying to push those boundaries a little further and reacting as if, it's your problem for refusing this kindness, as opposed to, stopping and reevaluating what they're doing that caused you to do that and be like, because that's what I would do. If somebody absolutely refused something that I just hadn't even had a clue about, I'd be like, well, okay, what did I do? And sex offenders don't do that. They never go, what did I do? Right.
Mm.
That's not in their brain. Their brain is going, how do I get this person to do what I want them to do? So on that, a last thing to look out for would be, and this is real internal, but what we have to tell sex offenders a lot of times, to get them to understand how relationships are supposed to be is, um, hey, when you start to want to move people around like pawns, right? Because they'll start having these ideas of like, well, this is how I want this relationship to be. This is where I want this person to be. This is where I want this person to be. And it could be like emotionally or physically or geographically, right? It could be, I I would like my mother to live next door to me, hypothetically. I'm just throwing this out
Mhm.
there. And they will go take that and go, okay, how do I convince my mother that she has to live next door to me? Well, I could buy her house. Okay. What can I do? Can I convince her of this? Can I convince her of this? And they'll go on this long train of thoughts on how to convince this person and manipulate this person. And if you stop and you're like, well, what does your mom want? They look at you like you're crazy. They're like, ah,
Mm.
what is she? What? I want her to live next door to me. And you're like, so how that would manifest in a relationship, right? Is, you know, it's not about you, right? It's about what they want and always taking what you want and getting all the way around to where it's actually what they want. And you've lost, and that happens in small ways, right? That give and take. But if that's happening all the time, or that's happening in big ways about things that should matter, big boundaries you have about your body, things like that, that is a very big red flag. So, if you're like, hey, I always wanted to retire in the mountains, and they're like, yeah, but I want to retire on the beach, and really the beach is better, and you should think about the beach. And I don't even know why you like the mountains. And let me neg on that for a while and talk about how crazy the mountains are and everything. And you're just like, Okay, the beach is fine, I guess. And they're like, good, glad we decided that.
Yeah.
That or something to that extent. That is a very bad sign.
Well, and that's I think, when someone's really kind of starting out that journey of maybe so you kind of alluded to the two types of boundaries, right? You've got very porous or soft boundaries where you don't know what you want. And you said something and it reminded me of a quote by Carl Jung, who's the famous psychiatrist, who said, "If you do not know who you are, the world will tell you." And
Mhm.
that is
Oh
so
yeah.
true. And because you become very malleable. And if you don't know, people will put thoughts in your heads. Oh, you are such a manipulator. And you're like, am I manipulative? Maybe I am. And when you're just constantly in a state of self-doubt, how can you ever put up a fence that says, no, no, you don't get to go past here? Um, and if you are
Which
kind of in that state where you're just like, I don't know what I want. I don't then I'm not saying don't get into relationships, because I think sometimes the way that we figure that out is by relationship, but by finding, maybe that relationship is a therapist, because that's where you start. Because that is presumably a safer place. This is not a romantic relationship. And if it turns that way, some serious violations have happened. So there's rules, there are rules, and rules are different than boundaries. We could talk about that later. Rules are definitely different than boundaries. But if you enter into a safer relationship that is established on rules, that we don't do this, then there's a little bit more trust right there. Like, I know that this can't go past here. Um, so that might be a great place,
yeah.
or having a friend or parent or someone that you trust, that you can start to kind of talk to about what you're feeling, what you want, and maybe start to come out of that amorphous goo of not knowing who you are. So there's that porous side, but then there's, like you talked about, the wall, the rigid boundaries, where you're like, nope, no one is going to get in, no one is going to change me, no one is going to, no one has any influence. Like, these are my thoughts and no one can change my thoughts. Well, then you're never going to grow, right? And so if you've got, these really rigid ideas and you won't let anybody, penetrate them, but it should take time, right? I loved what you said about, kind of this negotiation process where, maybe I do have a date with someone and I have really strong ideas about something. Is that person willing to also be influenced? Because if it's just,
Mm,
because you mentioned, if it's just you're the one who has to change all the time, and they never change any ideas about themselves, then that should be like a nope, 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 nope. Like you, your friends, your relatives, you should be making each other better all the time. There should be give and take on both sides. And so, and there's going to be some things that you are going to hold, like, you know, religion is one of those. Like if I believe in God, I'm sorry, there's going to be very, very, very few people who are going to convince me that I don't believe what I believe about the afterlife. And that's fine. That's totally fine. You know, but if I have a strong belief about coffee, you know, and I think Dunkin' Donuts is the best coffee ever. And then I get with a coffee snob like Ross, who's like, but have you tried? And I'm willing to open up to that and go, oh, you know what? This pour over is pretty good. So, but there should also be a time when I'm able to influence that person and that person shows genuine interest and genuine change. Because I think that predators in general are really good at faking change for a short period of time. And they
mm,
are very good
yeah.
at mimicking what it is they think you want. So if you sit there
Yep.
and you tell them, I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this, they might then become the perfect version of what you want, but for a short period of time.